Hi everyone, I'm Candice. I'm 25 and I grew up in both Vancouver, British Columbia and Beijing, China. One thing about me is I love to host board game nights, and one of my favorite games to play is Catan. A fun fact about me is that I've lived in 5 cities, which include Boston, Palo Alto, Middletown, Vancouver, and Beijing.
Mm. I have two quick questions here before I sort of formally introduce you to listeners. Question one, what is board game number two and board game number three in terms of your favorites?
So that this always changes for me all the time because I always find new board games. But currently, I really like Calico, so I would say that's number two. It's a chill game where you just try to find pieces to make a really beautiful quilt, and there's some rules about patterning, and it's cat related. And if people know me, they know I have a cat named Loaf, and I just love everything cat. Third game I would probably say is Monopoly Deal. It's just a quick, easy game for anyone to pick up, and it's something familiar but with a fun twist to it.
Hmm. I love it. I've heard of Monopoly and Catan. I'll check out the number two quilt game, which I've heard for the first time today. Question number two was, out of the 5 cities, if you had to pick a favorite.
Another tough question. I really love Vancouver as a city, but I think I would take the people from Beijing and Boston and move them to Vancouver, and then I would have a perfect city.
Okay, so you cheated a little bit, but
Yeah.
that's okay. I know it's hard to pick. After Minerva, I mean, every senior, we always ask them, what was your favorite city out of the seven or the six? Always like a very, very difficult question. So
Yeah.
I'm dreading being asked that question a few years down the line. Um, to formally introduce you to listeners, that's Candice Shi. She's an alumni of Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. She did a BA in biology. Today, we'll just be chatting more about the choices she made, the lessons she's learned along the way, as well as I'm sure there'll be tons of advice and insights and new perspectives for any middle or high schooler listening who's thinking about college and sort of has either excitement or fear or curiosity. I think this podcast aims to address sort of all these different emotions. It definitely is a spectrum. Um, Welcome to Uni Unveiled. I'm your host, Arya Daror, currently studying at Minerva University. Welcome, Candice. Sorry for keeping you up late at night, but excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm excited to have the conversation too.
Awesome. I do this with all alumni. I get on the podcast. We're sort of bringing listeners up to speed. You graduated in the winter of 2021. From then to the present day, what has been the path? Like, what have you been working on?
Yeah, I'll start chronologically. So, first, I graduated and moved to Boston, it's a couple hours away from Wesleyan, and I worked as a clinical trial assistant at a pharmaceutical company called Beijing. They specialized in oncology drugs, and there I learned a lot about legal aspects of how to conduct clinical trials and just the ins and outs of the different moving pieces of how to make a clinical trial run smoothly. So that kept me busy for around 8 months or so. But during that time, I was also applying to genetic counseling graduate school because I knew that was the final career that I wanted to pursue. And thankfully, I got in my first round of applications. So around August of 2022, I moved to the Bay Area to start my master's program at Stanford. So I've been doing that for 2 years. And a couple months ago in June, I just graduated from that program. And most recently, I've just been preparing for my certification exam for genetic counseling and also looking for jobs to try and stay in the Bay Area.
Let's talk a bit about genetic counseling. I don't know the ABCs. I dropped biology grade 9 onwards. So we'll have to really start with the basics and we'll sort of build our way up. Let's start with just an elementary. What is genetic counseling? What do you do as a genetic counselor?
Yeah, I love sharing about what genetic counseling is to people who aren't familiar because it is a pretty niche field. and it's quite new as well. But in general, genetic counselors are healthcare professionals who see patients who might benefit from genetic testing. And that might be due to several reasons. Maybe there's a genetic condition that runs in their family and they want more information. Or maybe they're thinking of having children and are curious about all the genetic testing available now for a fetus or for parents. Or it could be something like this person currently has cancer and is curious if the cancer is caused by an inherited condition. So sometimes we do talk about pretty heavy topics with patients, but our role is to give them the information they need to decide if genetic testing is right for them. And then after genetic testing, we help them understand results and what it means for their health.
So, from what you're saying, tell me if I'm wrong. Like certain branches of medicine, where it can be emotionally draining because you're talking to people with maybe severe health issues or someone you have to like convey bad news to. There's also a whole emotional maturity angle to like being a good genetic counselor. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, for sure. In my title, it's genetic counselor, and the counselor part is quite a bit of my training and what I do, because just as you said, sometimes we're giving bad news or we need to help someone figure out decision making, which sometimes require counseling skills as well. So that's one of the reasons why I picked genetic counseling, because I was interested in more of the emotional aspects of health, where maybe as a doctor you might not have enough time to really establish that emotional counseling connection with your patient. So that's a unique part of genetic counseling.
So you sort of gave us a sneak peek, but I want to dive a little deeper here. We'll talk about what got you into biology in the first place a bit later on the episode. But what I want to talk about now is sort of once you did your BA in biology at Wesleyan, from biology, how did you actually land up at this niche of genetic counseling specifically? Like what really pulled you to the field?
Yeah, my quick answer is going to be something what you said. It's all dependent on your network and who you meet. So I first learned about genetic counseling from my lab professor at Wesleyan. I was in a genetics lab, but we were working on fruit flies, so not really related to human genetics, basically. And I knew I liked genetics, but I did not really like the lab work. So I was just really honest with him one day, saying like, hey, I like genetics, but I'm not really sure lab work is for me, or like fly genetics. What else can I do with this degree? And he literally just pulled up a document he had and started reading off some career paths, and genetic counseling was one of them. And I went home and did some research and was like, okay, this could be interesting. So from there, I talked to different people who did genetic counseling and some other careers, and really thought to myself, what do I want to do? And that's how I found genetic counseling. So yeah, talk to people and you never know what you'll find.
Especially your professors, if you sort of are into computer science or economics and you're struggling to find out which of like the hundreds of fields within that you want to get into, I think your professor has an idea of at least quite a few. If not them themselves, they've worked with people in academia or industry who are in different niches, so they can actually put you in touch with someone who gets you this like niche internship or niche research work. Professors is like I keep saying on the podcast again and again, one of the most underrated resources at any university. Every student needs to be like reaching out more to professors, taking more advantage of them, and that need not be just the people who teach you. That could be literally anyone who is of interest to talk to. So I'm glad you actually reached out. I think it's important to sort of just because I'm doing economics doesn't mean I enjoy like every niche of economics. So like being clear about this is what I enjoy, this is what I want to set to the side. In my case, it's sort of I enjoy the developmental economics, the qualitative side. Let's set some of the calculus and the math heavy side. And I can get into that in the future. There's tons of niches depending on sort of interest areas. So yeah.
Exactly as you said.
What we'll do is I want to actually rewind in time, get back. In fact, half of this podcast is going to be a memory test because we're getting back to like high school and undergrad days. But let's go way back to high school days, 11th, 12th grade, Candice. you made three big decisions. The first was to come to the US. The second was to come to Wesleyan. The third was to do biology. We'll break down each
Mhm.
of these decisions one by one. So you spent your middle and high school, you spent your entire schooling days sort of alternating between Canada and China. I'm sure I haven't looked too in depth, but I'm sure both China and Canada have great programs in biology, in medicine. Also, probably would be cheaper for you as a local. I'm still curious what actually drew you to the US specifically to pursue your biology degree.
Yeah. Um, so I actually also applied to a lot of Canadian universities, but I'll start out for China why I didn't apply to Chinese universities. So I did all my schooling in English, and I am Chinese and I do speak Chinese, but my level of Chinese was just not good enough for pursuing higher education there. And by then, I spent many years in China and wanted to go back to North America. So that was more of a personal decision there. And then between Canada and US, this was a contention that was quite difficult for me at the time and also for my parents. Like there's great pros and cons to both. And as you said, cost was a major one. If I went to university in Canada, it would have been a lot cheaper. Um, what it came down to was kind of thinking past just university. Like, where did I want to have my life in my early 20s, start my career, have the flexibility of really actualizing my career goals. And it felt to me that the US had more opportunities in the space of health and biology. And I was pretty sure that I will likely go to graduate school as well. And that pushed me towards the US. And then personally, I wasn't too sure about what exactly I wanted to study. And for most Canadian schools, you have to go in with a specific major and you actually apply to the specific school that your major is housed in. So it's a lot more difficult to change your major as well after you get accepted to a specific school in Canada. Whereas in the US, especially with liberal arts schools, which is the type of school that Wesleyan is, they give you a lot of flexibility with choosing your major and switching. And I will say, like, financially, I am grateful that my parents were able to support me if I did choose to go to the US. So in that sense, I knew that was a factor, but it wasn't a major limiting obstacle as well.
Let's talk about, now that you've sort of brought the term to the forefront, let's talk about liberal
Mm-hmm.
arts. I've had a few liberal arts students on the podcast, Swarthmore, CMC. They're very passionate about sort of, I do not believe in this concept of lectures and sort of
Mm-hmm.
tunnel vision. And they're very passionate about this concept of liberal arts and flexibility and student to professor connection. So I think there's a lot of pros about liberal arts. Unfortunately, I'll speak to India at least. A lot of my friends might be able to list the top big schools, but if I ask them for even a few top liberal arts schools, they would really struggle to come up with names. So a lot of this podcast is hopefully we can bring schools like Wesley and other less well-known liberal arts colleges to a limelight. Because when I was doing my basic research on the website, it seemed like a great place. Like I might have actually wanted to go and study there. There were a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different pros. Let's talk about sort of what type of student do you think should actually consider and apply to liberal arts colleges? Is there a type of personality trait or something special about these students where they would thrive in a liberal arts school?
Yeah, I would say two main things. One is someone who is truly interested in multiple disciplines and gets excited when you can mix and match things or bring in different ideas or fields together in just like day-to-day conversation. Because I think a liberal arts school really helps you foster those connections through different fields. And when I was at Wesleyan, I'd say like 80% of my friends were not biology majors or even science majors. So you will interact with a lot of people who studied very different things than you. And I think if you enjoy talking to people who study totally different things, you would enjoy liberal arts schools more. And then two is really wanting to go to university for the more maybe social and community aspect, because generally liberal arts schools are quite small, and a lot of your time is spent with classmates or people in your dorm. Whereas I feel like maybe in larger schools or schools in like larger cities, you can kind of escape from that university bubble and go explore cities, or like really just focus on one aspect of the school or one social aspect of the school. But at a liberal arts college, you are kind of touching every group, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So if you're interested and invested in forming big, close networks, which might sound contradictory. If it's big, can it be close? But I think at a liberal arts school, it can be. Then I feel like liberal arts is also a good option for you to consider.
I'm gonna push you here. How can the
Mm-hmm.
network be both big and close at a liberal arts school?
Yeah. When I say big, I think I mean by potentially a little bit more diverse. I keep on drawing back to how most of my friends were not biology majors, because I actually met most of my friends outside of class. And this definitely could be a generalization, but it feels like a lot of my friends who went to a larger university, a main way for them to meet friends is through their classes and or through their major, which obviously makes sense and is a great way to make friends. But at a liberal arts school, people that aren't in your major often take classes in different disciplines, so you just get a big mix. And also at Wesleyan, my class size was around 800, so you might not know everyone, but by your second year, you pretty much seen everyone's faces. So in that sense, you actually get to see like 800 people. That's quite a big number. But at the same time, you can have a close knit environment because, in some ways, liberal arts schools, they make you almost be stuck on campus. A lot of them are in more rural areas of the U.S., so there's not much else to do outside of campus. So everyone is really invested in hosting different events or like be active in clubs. So you do form close knit relationships, even though you might interact with a bigger pool of people during your day to day.
Okay, I think that clarifies it. I
Yeah.
also, I also think for the most part, I think I agree. I've had students from huge colleges come on the podcast. Students from UC Berkeley and UCLA. I think they have somewhere mentioned sort of many of their friends are through class, sort of the chemistry geeks, and even the clubs are sort of the chemistry clubs versus at a school like Wesleyan. I'm sure even with like the general education requirements, you're taking a lot of classes outside of your major, where you're just with all types of classmates, and that's where a lot of the interactions happen. Um, let's Before we dive into Wesleyan specifically, let's talk about one
Mm-hmm.
specific aspect about Wesleyan, which is location.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think I'm sort of a big city person. I might not want to study in any college that's sort of outside the city. Each person can have their pros and cons list. How big of a factor was location for you when considering Wesleyan, and how much did you enjoy sort of the more suburban setting?
Yeah. Honestly, I think thinking back, high school, Candice should have thought a little bit more about location. Um, but I think something that could be unique about me is that I have moved several countries and cities throughout my childhood. So I was kind of confident that no matter where I was placed, I would be able to adapt and find things I enjoy and aspects that I like. So maybe that's why I didn't think as hard as I probably should have. Um, but for Wesleyan, um, I also knew I wanted to be close to major cities, and Wesleyan's kind of in a sweet spot because you can take a bus or a train for 2 hours, either north or south, and then you can either end up in Boston if you go north, or New York City if you go south. So yes, day to day, you're kind of in Connecticut, where it's pretty suburban, not too much to do, but if you miss parts of the city, or if you need a big city to, I don't know, pitch your idea or do a summer internship, you can definitely go to those cities pretty easily. So for me, that was enough to check my box that it was flexible enough that I could have both.
Hmm. Let's talk now that we've got location to the side. Let's talk about other specific like pull factors to Wesleyan, and so
Mm-hmm.
over other good liberal arts colleges in the US, which I know have great bio programs. I'm thinking Swarthmore, Pomona, Harvey Mudd. Anything specifically that drew you to Wesleyan as a school?
Yeah. So previously I said I was in between different things that I enjoyed. So I was interested in visual arts, biology, general like human health, and also policy. So they're pretty broad topics. One thing that really drew me to, I'll say two things that really drew me to Wesleyan. First is how arts is really embedded in the culture of the school. It has a really strong arts program, especially a really strong film program, but just within what maybe students are interested in and like club wise is really easy to just casually be involved with arts. Like you don't have to major in it, which I did not end up majoring in it, but I knew just from talking to students that it was just easy to get involved in art. So that was a big drawing aspect to me to Wesleyan.
Hmm.
Yeah. And my second point for Wesleyan was that it is a liberal arts college, but it's actually called Wesleyan University, and that's because they have a small graduate school program. And what that means in a practical level is that they get a little bit more funding for science and labs, and that means they also have actual grad students running a lot of labs. So there, I would say, compared to some other liberal arts schools, there was just more science going on. And that was important to me since I knew a lot of my interest would rely on having lab work. So it was good to know that the school had additional funding, had a lot of labs that I could have access to.
Hmm. Got it. No, I think that's very clear. I won't follow up here. But what we will do is actually jump to our third big question. We talked about why US. We talked about why Wesleyan. We talked a bit about liberal arts. Let's talk about biology
Mm-hmm.
specifically. I've got a few people on the podcast who are from sort of a bio background, but no one I think has been doing like pure biology. It's either been biomechanical engineering or medicine.
Mm.
What attracted you about just pure biology and studying it? Like, what do you enjoy about that?
Yeah, so for biology, I was initially interested in biology in general because I enjoyed it as a way to understand society and life. Um, the logic behind it, the lens that we see life through, just fits with me. And I think that still rang true when I arrived at Wesleyan University and took classes. I still felt that this was the way that I most enjoyed approaching understanding life. Um, and I actually came into Wesleyan declared as a neuroscience major. Um, so I guess a little bit more niche than biology, but I quickly realized that it was too specific for me. And that's why I jumped back to like a larger scale biology major. Because then I could explore both neuroscience, but also more genetics level, more evolution ecology level. And I wanted that flexibility before I might have tunneled myself too fast in one specific niche. I'm really glad I chose biology instead of neuroscience instead. Um, and I previously said I was interested in health and policy, and then biology was just in my opinion, and also talking to other people, a great starting off point if you did eventually want to branch off into something like health policy or public health. Or I know people who've gone to do bioengineering afterwards, getting a biology BA. So for me, it was really just the breadth that it allowed me to explore, um, and just matched with how I wanted to learn more about the world.
I really enjoyed listening to that. I think two reasons why I really enjoyed that answer. One, I love the concept of like starting broader and then narrowing down versus like narrowing down and then getting broader because you realized you're not interested in that niche. Maybe for some people who are just still very, very uncertain, maybe undergrad is the time to do something much more broad. I'm going to take a different example, computer science, and then you go and do a master's in like AI or like blockchain or whatever
Mm-hmm.
specifically you want to study there. I love how it went from neuroscience to bio and then sort of genetic counseling. Also, number two, I think is sort of people struggle a lot. I know some people struggle a lot with like, I have these five different interests. How do I narrow down in the major? I feel like maybe it's asking a different set of questions, which is sort of each major has its own skill set. So question one is sort of what skill set do I want to have once I graduate college? Number two, as you said, is what kind of problems do I want to solve? What kind of problems am I passionate about solving? Maybe that also gives more clarity. I think number
Mm-hmm.
three is how does this major influence the way I sort of look at the world? And so like a bio major will look at the world differently to a history major, like a literature major. So sort of how I want to like look at the world once I exit college.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe for some people that actually means like double majoring or doing a lot of electives or doing a couple of minors. Do you think you agree with what I just said?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary of different approaches to ask yourself like, what I want to major in. Um, yeah, I totally agree.
So the reason I brought that up is sort of setting myself up for the next follow up. Maybe this is a challenging question. You listed like four different interests. You said bio, visual arts, health, policy. Why
Mm-hmm.
didn't you like double major at Wesleyan if you had all these multiple interests?
Yeah. Um, this might be a hot take, but I am a little bit against double majoring. I feel like one advice I have is to double major with caution. Only do it if you're super sure you actually like both things. And I didn't double major in two different fields because I felt like I could get enough of that discipline through just taking electives. And kind of by, not kind of, definitely by double majoring, you limit the amount of electives you can take, which in turn for me meant that less time to explore my different interests. And also, from just my experience with university friends, a lot of people would double major in things that were kind of similar. Maybe there were overlapping classes, so it's easy to get that double major. And I think that works great for some people. But at the same time, like if you are still wanting to explore, that again limits, you're kind of doing something very similar, but you're limiting your time exploring something else. Um, and for me, something like policy, especially, I knew that it's a field that if I wanted to go into in the future, I don't really need to have a degree in policy or like government or law. Like you can still be the content expert and advise on policy, or you can get involved with a club. And if you somehow choose to really go down the path of law or policy, then you would need another degree anyways. So I feel like my personal view for undergrad is to just explore as much as you can, which sometimes means not double majoring, so you have enough time to take electives.
Hmm. Couple of thoughts and then a couple of
Yeah.
follow. I think this is something I wish I had been told before entering Minerva. I still am double majoring after sort of giving a thought to the pros and cons. But so number one is it sounds very fancy to say a double major. The logistics of
Mm-hmm.
it are actually quite difficult in college. One, from the point of view that you have
Yeah.
less electives. Number two, also, it's just a lot of work and workload. And so, do you actually want to spend that much time in the classroom and in your textbooks versus like
Mm-hmm.
some people come to college and they want to be spending time outside the classroom on a hundred other things. Number two is sort of, I was talking about double majoring with another student who's doing a major minor, and her big thing was sort of how deep do you actually want to go? Like if you have one thing
Mm-hmm.
which is like this is the thing I want to actually do as a career. This is my big interest. I'm also sort of interested in this other thing, don't want to go very, very deep, a few classes. Maybe that starts off with electives and that can become a minor. But a minor will also save you a significant amount of time in classes versus the double major. What I want to
Yeah.
ask now is for someone who's clear, for whatever reason, they don't agree with your advice, they want a double major. Do you think it makes more sense to do like two very close fields and sort of have that intersection? Or do you think it makes sense to do like very unrelated fields because there's a totally different skill set? So,
Mm.
example that comes to mind is like maybe bio and chemistry or like bio and like philosophy. Like, which do you think makes more sense if
Mm.
someone is interested in biochemistry and philosophy?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. And I'll answer generally. I think my first reaction would to do something more different. So like bio and philosophy um, versus bio and chemistry. And one practical aspect that comes to mind, especially if you're an international student, is after you graduate from a US university, your job has to relate to your major somehow in a very direct way. Either like you took a class that uses the skills you need, that trained you in the skills you need in your job or something like that.
Mm.
So if you do bio and philosophy, that kind of opens more options and doors versus bio and chemistry, probably a lot of overlapping careers that you can either use your bio degree or chemistry degree. So that's a practical consideration to take. Um, and then also in terms of the people you meet and maybe your network, again, coming back to that buzzword, if you take bio and philosophy, you're more likely to meet different people and people who might challenge you in different ways or talk to you about alternative opportunities, which I feel like in the long run might pay out more than if you stuck with something more similar.
Hmm. I guess last thing I'll say on this topic is I think someone who graduates university, and this can be like through so many different majors, but someone who graduates university with a good quantitative and a good qualitative skill set is like that is awesome. Like that is a
Mm,
good combination. Some people graduate with a very quantitative skill set or a very qualitative skill set. A lot of work requires a mix of both. Is sort of a
yeah.
overgeneralization, but I think that applies to maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 careers. In that they require both. See how you can like complement that. If you're doing like a very math heavy degree, if you can take electives that are more qualitative, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Which is sort of the last thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've already touched upon some super enjoyable aspects, some pros of Wesley, and I'm sure throughout the conversation this will keep coming through. What I want to do is like throw an absolute darker question to you now, which is, and this is true of every university in the world. This is not Wesleyan. Every university has flaws and limitations and drawbacks, even if that's a Stanford or a Harvard or a Minerva. What are some of those limitations or drawbacks for a student for whom maybe Wesleyan could be a dream school?
Yeah. Let's see. I think I would say three main things. So one is you're at a smaller school, so oftentimes, especially towards the end of your career at Wesleyan, you might feel limited by the class options available to you or what professors are most knowledgeable about because your class options are dependent on what the professor studied or researched. So I found myself wanting a little bit more, such as in areas of like bioinformatics. There was only one or two classes, and I took both of them, but I wanted more. Or in terms of genetics, there wasn't a lot of human genetics classes at a higher level, but there was a lot of, say, like animal or plant genetics. So that's just one thing to consider. Two is another practical thing and something that I might talk a lot about, which is like visa and admin support. And I might talk a lot about it is because I was part of an international student advisory board. So I work really closely with admin to hash out a lot of like, let's say visa, immigration, international student support issues. And at a smaller school, you might not have a lot of people working at the international school office, which can mean which can mean several things, such as having a slow turnaround time for visa applications, or like when you need a job approval thing, like it might take them longer to, they might not have a lot of like support or seminars to help walk you through or help you decide what to do with your visa, or how a major might impact your ability to stay in the US. So I think definitely look into a school's administration structure and international student support, because that really could affect your experience at university or affect your ability to move on to whatever you want to do after college. Three, and I'll be really honest here, so Wesleyan and a lot of liberal arts schools are quite liberal in just like discussion point of view, and that might not be for everyone. And sometimes, especially being outside of Wesleyan for a while, it did feel like an echo chamber at times, because most people leaned towards the liberal side in politics or in like general views on the world, which I think there's merit to have maybe a more of a balanced conversation. So I think that can also be a limitation for both people who maybe already lean liberal or maybe lean more conservative.
Okay, very interesting. And I feel like we're not generalizing. So this was Wesleyan specific, but I feel like aspects of this can actually be taken and applied in some capacity to different liberal arts colleges. I'm also seeing what you're saying coming through to the other liberal arts colleges I've hosted on the episode. Great opportunity for me. I will shout out a very underrated resource at university for all the high schoolers listening. Please take advantage of, like, the name could be different. I mean, it's called Student Services. Please take advantage of the employees at your university who help you with visas, with CPT, OPT, with internships, with like maintaining your F1 status. That actually shouldn't be a headache as a student. Like, you should just be heads down, hustling and studying and learning. Outsource as much of that to them as you can and let them sort of handle that. But make sure that you've got the basics in place, especially for those of us who want to like settle and work in the US after. It's complicated. We need someone to actually like dumb it down for us, who actually knows what's going on. So please take advantage of your visa officers or whatever those people are called. Let's spend a few minutes on the application. And so what we'll do here is not sort of a walkthrough of how you approach the application strategically or what was your application. I have two different questions here. Let's start with the first, which is, again, this is way back. So this is sort of we're going way back in time. But what do you think really went well in your application? Why do you think you were a super unique and strong candidate and eventually ended up getting into Wesleyan? I know this is sort of the other side of the coin where you can never sort of know, but if you have any sort of inkling about what went well.
Yeah, I think what went well in my application was I was, in my essays, able to really show my genuine care and curiosity to my community that I'm part of. I'm not exactly sure what example I ended up using for Wesleyan, but this might be it. Like, I did an extracurricular where I was teaching crafts and English to just nearby middle and elementary schools in my high school, and I was really involved in that club, and I'm trying to build it out and also form like long-lasting relationships with the kids there. And I think that extracurricular and focusing on that really showcased the part of me that's very genuine and caring, and community and building community is really important to me. And I feel like if that's something that also resonates with you, I think that's really important to show to universities, especially liberal arts schools, because they are looking for people who are able to be community builders. But just broadly, making sure you show yourself in a very genuine and honest way, whatever that might be for you. I think that probably is the highlight of my application. Other things, I feel like I kind of just did what most other people would do.
and you ended up getting into Wesleyan. So something somewhere went right. The admissions officer was happy, but on the flip side, and we've all made those mistakes. I'm comfortable being brutally honest. I know I messed up a lot on the Minerva application. We all say this, like somehow I got in. I never thought I
Mm-hmm.
would. If I could give you a magic wand, send you back in time, 11th, 12th grade Candice, what would you do differently if you had to reapproach the application, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I think one thing I definitely would have done more is to interview and talk to more current students.
Mm.
Um, I somehow felt at that time like it wasn't too important, like just like attending those like big group seminars was enough to get a feel, but I really wish I had more one-on-one conversations with current students, and also like sign up for those potentially optional interviews with students or alumni. Um, I don't think I did that for any school, and I wish I did because I think just meeting someone is a lot more special than just reading an essay that you wrote. And I think I might have doubted myself to be able to present myself in a certain way during interviews, but I think however you are, just presenting yourself naturally will pay off. So I think that would be the biggest thing I would redo if I were to reapply to university.
Mm. You also, and this is because we talked about this before the episode, and
Mm-hmm.
it's actually blew my mind. Like this, you're the first person who ever made this mindset shift for me. So let's definitely talk about your opinion as to you are the customer, not the university, and say more about what.
Mm. Yeah. I definitely did not have that mindset when I was applying, and I really developed that mindset when, again, I was like working more closely with the school administration, doing advocacy work for international students. Because if you're paying to go to university and you're contributing to the classroom, the community, like you are a client, and there's so many universities out there, and you are a special applicant, and you should also be pretty choosy of where you spend your next 4 years. So in that sense, that's what I mean by you should evaluate the university as well. So that's why you want to talk to the students. Like, are they actually getting the support they need? Like, what would they say are some drawbacks of the school, or what would they improve? I think it's really important that you hear maybe some of the negatives or struggles that students face, because you don't want to end up somewhere where you don't feel comfortable or you don't feel supported. And it could be important to ask if the department that you're interested in doing your major in, or even the school in general, like how receptive they are to student feedback, or like how often have they implemented actual changes. And that goes back to the mindset of that you are the client, and if the school isn't implementing student feedback regularly, then that could be a sign that when you arrive, like things might not be as nice as they present it to you, since all the advertisement that schools do, like they're trying to attract you as a client. So in that way, you can be reminded that they're also trying to get you to come.
Maybe a couple of sort of strong opinions here, but I want to,
Mm-hmm.
not especially because the high schoolers listening to this podcast, is number one, of course, on the official website and all those seminars, the university is putting its best face forward. The best way to actually authentically understand the experience is to directly reach out to current students and talk to them very authentically. That could be through LinkedIn, that could even be through the university. Even if they
Mm-hmm.
are sort of a student ambassador, they generally are overall pretty candid about the experience. They're not sort of
Mm-hmm.
selling at the university. That helps a lot. And especially going into that conversation with like, these are a few flaws or limitations I have read online about Wesleyan. What do you think? Have you experienced
Mm-hmm.
that? If and let's say someone who's considering Minerva comes on a call with me and specifically asks me that this is what I am worried about, this is what I'm worried about, I will be like 110% very authentic with them. I might even drive them away from Minerva. I feel like you won't have a great time here.
Yeah.
generally they will be looking out for your interest. Like maybe 8 out of 10 of those students will be on your side.
Mm-hmm.
That's very essential. If I had limited time, I would prioritize the student interviews over like the seminars or the sessions carried by the college. Number two, what you just said about you as a customer, I think equally applies to your time at university. And so how like in my family, my grandpa is like a big believer of, if I have paid money for a product or a service, I want to squeeze the juice out of it. Like I want to really make the most of it to make sort of have the value of my money. Um,
Yeah.
do the same at university. You're paying for like professors' time. You're paying for all those resources, the career center. You're paying for a beautiful campus. You're paying for, in fact, the peers you're around. And so, sort of
Mm-hmm.
maximize whatever value you can get from that university. And this also can be after graduating. I'm sure there are certain services offered to alumni as well. So those are a few like sort of strong opinions on that. But I think ultimately, yes, you are the customer. Unfortunately, most of us sort of when you're applying, maybe it's okay to have the mindset that okay, they are evaluating me. But once I get offers from like let's say five good universities, then the mindset really has to become I am the customer,
Yes.
really each of them and like sort of make a good decision where you're spending those next 4 years of your life. Um, I think more than the money investment, I want to talk about the time investment. 4 years where you're like high energy, high ambition. You want the university to sort of take you to the next orbit in life, not keep you at like the same level. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what I want to do now, I think we've touched a lot on the choices you made in high school, application process. That was our sort of before university section. That was section one of our episode. We fast forward in time. Again, this is looking back in the past for you, but we'll talk about 2017 to 2021, your 4 years at Wesleyan. I want to dive deep on some specific aspects there. Um, let us begin with I think a beauty of liberal arts is the ability to take very random, very different classes across like five, six different fields of interest. You have your whole general education requirements. Someone at Claremont McKenna like jokingly told me that like only 60% of my classes are economics. All the other 40% are the most random, all over the place subjects. I think there's a beauty to that, and I think there's value in that. Let's talk about some electives you took at Wesleyan and what was the value you derived from these classes.
Yeah, this is a topic that gets me really excited about because I love the electives that I took at university. Um, let's see. I think I'll start with just my favorite elective. It was a community-based learning, project learning class. And I think if your university offers any classes like that, I would strongly recommend it. But for this class, it was called Health of Communities. So what we did was we paired up with a local hospital in our town, and we helped them conduct research projects, whatever they needed that semester. And usually those projects were all pretty community engagement based. Mine specifically was on how can we help the patients who come to this hospital collect family health history more accurately and just like generally collect it more. So it started with like interviewing people, like how do you create a survey that people actually can and want to take? And then how do you consolidate that into advice to give to the hospital? And we needed to do a presentation on research and also what we would recommend for next steps. And I just love that class because it one allowed me to actually engage with Middletown people and then also engage with people who are working at the hospital. And you are making a pretty substantial change to how they might be running the hospital. Some other projects were about like domestic violence or how to get like more people to come in for flu vaccines. Like they were all really meaningful projects. But my class also had a component where it was small group discussion, where we would pick different articles about public health, about just health in general, and discuss it. So it wasn't just the projects; it was also the discussions that made it really impactful for me.
I think at this might be a slightly more simplistic or basic take on electives, but I think also one more value of electives which I'll add here is let's say you're a computer science major, you're taking three intense computer science classes over the course of a semester. Like give yourself a break, have some fun, take a very niche,
Mm-hmm.
very random, fun elective, get out of that like intense study mindset. explore something which, like, as a child, let's say you've always wanted to do, like, and I know universities which offer classes like this. Let's say you wanted to do like beekeeping or sailing,
Yeah.
flying, like you wanted to fly an airplane. There are universities which will offer you such classes. So take the most
Hmm.
out of the box, crazy electives, have some fun with them. Also, on a more serious note, definitely take electives in fields where, like, you didn't want to minor or major in this, but you want to like have an intro. And so, like, I want to have
Yeah.
an intro to philosophy, an intro to computer science, an intro to economics, just to understand
Hmm.
how that kind of a profession views the world. But I'm
Exactly.
absolutely a huge advocate for electives. I sort of can't really push you here or challenge you because I myself am very, very like clear about and very strong when I advocate for, like, even if you're like very tunnel vision that I want to like be a software engineer when I grow up, I think there's still value in developing complementing skill sets, like developing a financial skill set or a philosophical skill set. You will still use that in your software engineering career, even if
Hmm.
you're going to do that for the next 40 years of your life. Um, so
Yeah. Just to cement your point more, I took a religion class that was like really writing heavy. Um, and
mm,
I personally am not a religious person, and I didn't grow up in a family or community that was very religious. So I like didn't really know anything, but I knew it was something important to many people and wanted to learn more about it. So that was also a pretty eye-opening class. It was a pretty hard class because we had to read a lot of dense religious texts.
mhm.
And it was also a discussion-based class, and definitely did put me out of the comfort zone because I didn't know a lot of the context or background of the things that we read compared to some of my classmates. But I'm overall like really glad that I just took something that I like barely knew anything about. Um, yeah, so I think you should definitely take at least one fun, random elective class, and then pick one where you do want to deep dive into something that you know you might have an interest in already.
There we go. And I think even if this, like, the elective class isn't something you use super professionally, either it
Mm-hmm.
might elevate the interactions you have with people around you. And so I'm going to run with your example. Maybe it elevates the way you interact with your friends who are more religious or have certain like identities or beliefs, or it just
Mm-hmm.
like informs you in terms of actually living a more elevated life. And so tomorrow you
Yeah.
have like, a better understanding. And so tomorrow, let's say whatever happens and your beliefs change, or just as a worldview, you have like this more spiritual way of viewing the world. So even if it's not from a professional point of view, I think electives make you like a well-rounded person, an interesting person, someone who's well
Mm-hmm.
exposed to different things. That is also important. College is not just like preparing you professionally for the future, but like also for life beyond your profession, for the future. Is how I view it, at least. Uh, Along very similar lines, I've just been talking about like elevating your friendships and interactions, elevating your life. Um, Again, I want to like double down on university is not just a time for like filling your brain with like amazing ideas and sort of intellectual growth, professional growth, but you will actually see a 180-degree shift. And so people who graduate will always look back on themselves as on like day one and be like, I almost can't recognize that person just because of the people you meet, the experiences you have, the highs and lows of the roller coaster. I think throughout university, it's important to like be intentional about how am I growing as a person, what kind of adult am I becoming, what kind of like values, beliefs, competencies am I developing. And so let's talk about a topic which I honestly wish I could cover with each guest on my episode, because everyone actually has a different journey here. What's been your journey
Mm-hmm.
of at Wesleyan day one to graduation day, the 4 years? What was your personal growth and what was your personal transformation like as a person?
Yeah, I love this question because I do feel pretty strongly that I did become a pretty different person, a different version of myself after university. I think probably the first thing that I noticed and also other people around me noticed was I became a more confident person in like both my abilities and then also just the way that I think. Um, and this was definitely a gradual process. I think it just started off being more confident in like just sharing what I really thought or like being okay with half formed thoughts in discussions with friends, And then quickly that translated into like speaking more in class or like speaking more in class discussions. I still remember like first day of my bio intro class, like sat at the very back of the class. But as university went on, like I would always sit more close to the front and like actually share my ideas or like ask my questions. So I think that was a big one. And then also another point that I feel like I had a lot of growth was just defining my identity a little bit more culturally. I think many, or particularly many audiences will resonate. Like if you go to university in a culture or country that you're not super familiar with, like it will challenge you in the way of how you view yourself and how much, let's say, of a aspect of your past or community identity you want to hold on to, and then also what parts of this like new community or new country's identity you want to incorporate. And I feel like that challenge is awesome at making you more of a solidified person identity wise. Last thing that I want to mention, I could go on forever, but a big thing was I became a lot more interested and appreciative of the outdoors. And it's actually one area that I draw a lot of confidence from. I think from being at Wesleyan, being with people that already appreciated the outdoors, like go camping, climbing, or just hiking, that would then like teach me those skills. I just like opened my eyes to like, wow, it's really fun to explore nature, to maybe get a little bit dirty and tired. And then let's say you're backpacking or camping, that feeling of, okay, I can be self-reliant, can really translate to other parts of your life. Like if I can do this out in the wild with nothing, I can probably figure out this obstacle that I'm facing at school.
Mm. And that's why doing hard things is sometimes important, because sort of it's just about building confidence that you can go and like do something else. And so maybe that's the outdoors. Maybe doing like something difficult in the classroom or doing a difficult
Mm-hmm.
project, it translates to like you going like summiting a mountain in the outdoors. I think it works like very different ways. But
Yep.
university is absolutely a time to do hard things. You need not like reach the goal. Someone once said that like a goal should have a maximum 50% chance of success. That's what an ambitious goal is. I love that concept of like set challenging goals. If you meet even like 1 out of 10, the confidence boost will be insane.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like actually picking your brain a bit more about confidence. I think there's value to talk
Yep.
about confidence on the podcast, um, especially for high schoolers who currently like lack listening, who might be lacking self-esteem, self-confidence. I think I was in that place around 11th, 12th grade, and then sort of making a jump to a different country, having issues with homesickness, being around very talented people with amazing accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy, especially first sem of college, to get down into like a very downward curve of like, I don't deserve to be here,
Yeah.
I don't belong, I'm not enough, zero self-esteem, zero self-confidence. From that place, what can you suggest to potential listeners on how do you like slowly build up your self-confidence bit by bit, especially from whatever little we've talked before the episode, you mentioned to me you were more introverted and like less talkative, less outgoing. And I see like a 360-degree transformation from your end there. Um,
Yeah. I think I definitely was, yeah, more introverted, more shy, like not very self-assured coming into university. And I think first thing I'd say is like, you're definitely not alone in that feeling. A lot of your peers, even if they might not show it, probably feel some sort of maybe imposter syndrome or just lack of confidence. Uh, and I think one way to maybe view feeling not confident is that I guess you can only go up. You can only become better and more confident. And I hope that gives you some reassurance that way. And also, it's important to push yourself for sure, to say yes to things, to just try things, even though you really don't want to do it or feel like you're not going to succeed. But on the flip side, it's also really important to devote time to find those anchoring places, anchoring moments, or people that make you feel comfortable. Because I think everyone needs a safe, comforting environment to recharge, to go to when like some days are harder than others. And it is really about balance. And let's say you start university and you start off with just cementing those more comforting things. That's also totally fine. Then it sets you well for being more brave and like challenging yourself later on. Or you can do the flip side, do more challenging things first, but don't forget to find those comforting people or spaces.
Mm. Let's make this personal. We were talking at a high level. I want to make it personal because I'm sure hearing your story might also be an inspiration for a listener. And so tell us
Mm-hmm.
about how actually Candice put herself out of her comfort zone and challenged herself to grow at university over those 4 years at Wesleyan. Any specific examples you can share here?
Yeah, this ties back to like something I mentioned before, like being on the International Student Advisory Board. Again, like I wasn't a very outspoken person, like relatively timid, and I didn't feel like it matched me to be on a board where like I would have to do a lot of like advocating and like talking to admin and also talking to the student body and being that relay person. I felt like, oh, that is not something I do. Um, but this opportunity came up in my second year university. So by then I had a pretty good friend group and already started building confidence. And I was like, hey, I think I can do this. Or it's worth a try for me to do. And I know I will have my friends and have people in the international student circle that would like back me up and help me get the ball rolling. So that really allowed me to just like be like, okay, I'm gonna apply and just try. And I'm so glad I did because I realized you can be a strong advocate even if you're not the loudest voice in the room. Make your potentially like weaknesses that you thought into your strength. Like I think by maybe not being the first person to speak or taking longer time to gather my thoughts, it made me a better listener. And it also made me be able to listen well enough to like actually gather summarizing points that I could really easily say back to, let's say, the student or like translate to the presenter, sorry, the admin person that I was presenting to. Um, I think that story would be kind of my personal example of how I challenged myself and how it paid out in the end.
Hmm. I'm going to be kind of honest. This is
Yeah.
a rough transition, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
get this next topic is very very worth talking about. But speaking of challenging yourself at university and doing something sort of out of your comfort zone, out of the box, you actually took a gap semester between your third and fourth year. I'm sure that was
Mm-hmm.
challenging on multiple levels. The easiest thing that I can think of is sort of your friends graduating earlier than you, and so you feeling sort of left behind in time, and also having that gap of one semester as to like why did I take this and what do I do. I think it's so valuable. I've seen people take gap semesters and gap years, still finish and graduate university. Some have even dropped out. The ones who are working on startups. I think if there's a good reason, there is value in taking one. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, or fortunately, this is the first time that idea has even been brought up on the podcast. So let's spend some time here. Let's talk about your gap semester. On one side, what was the motivation? What was the purpose? And on the other side, after the gap semester was over, what was the value of it?
Yeah. Um, I definitely want to echo first that like I think for the right purposes, gap semester or gap years can be really transformative and what you need to get you to where you need to be. For myself, I took a gap semester right after my third year, so before I started my fourth year of university. Um, and several reasons why I took it. A big one was like COVID was happening, and for me, there were some like family obligations and instability that made me feel like I want to stay home, and I want to help out family a little bit more. And then two was, I think everything was pretty much remote for Wesleyan in that semester, and I just did not think that was worth my time and money to do a semester remotely. And I think this depends on your learning style. Like, I knew I probably couldn't really take advantage of things if I'm at home and wanting to help out with home stuff and trying to take online classes. And then I also knew I needed some more lab experience, which I would not have been able to get. And the third reason was I honestly felt pretty lost at that point in what exactly I wanted to do after university. And I felt like if I just finished off my fourth year, like, I wouldn't be very selective or purposeful in choosing what classes I'm taking. It'd just kind of be like fulfilling requirements and like finishing. And I didn't really want to do that. Like, again, thinking back to like, I really want to use my time at Wesleyan wisely. I felt that I needed time to gather and be purposeful in how I spent my last year. So that's a summary of why I took the gap semester. And it was a hard decision, as you mentioned. Like, I would have graduated later than a lot of my friends, and it's not a super popular thing to do. So I was just unsure, like, okay, how would it actually affect me, like, next semester or maybe like 2 years down the line. But I thought about it, and I told myself that my reasoning for taking this gap semester made sense and it would be better for me. So I just went ahead and did it. And I am really glad I did so, because spending that time with family was important to me. And also it really allowed me time to like make connections with people. For example, in the genetic counseling field, I was also exploring like immunology and have time to like call them and do my research and figure out a roadmap for my last year. So it was actually my gap semester that I finalized, okay, I actually am really interested in genetic counseling. This is something I want to do. But then at the same time realized I had gaps in my schooling that I needed to do before I could apply to graduate school. So in the end, it did pay off. It made my last year a lot more purposeful, and I could like go to school more settled, not really worry about family as much. And socially, I think like taking some of the risks previously, like being on the advisory board, joining all those clubs, it allowed me to like meet friends from different class years. So it ended up being like totally fine that a lot of my classmates did graduate a semester early.
Let's take an example student. You took a gap semester for reasons that might not be applicable to anyone in terms of you touched upon COVID and family obligations. Let's take an example student who's taking a gap sem purely from the perspective of like, I want a break. I want to either be working on something that's important to me or just realigning my passions and interests, being more intentional about how I'm spending, let's say, my last year or my last 2 years at university. Let's do some like on the spot creative brainstorming. You've got about 4 or 5 months in your hand. What do you think are some good ways to like more generally, regardless of major, spend your time during that gap semester to actually go back to university more intentional and more clear about what you're actually doing at university?
So what I would recommend, probably two things. One is really do taking parts of the gap semester to like give yourself a break. So when you do go back to school, you're fully recharged, because 4 years of school is a long time, and I don't think you should feel bad if you feel like you need a break for whatever reason. So definitely take a good break so you actually are recharged. Two would be, utilize this time to really figure out how you want to utilize the rest of your time. So I would recommend like reaching out to all the people that you might have thought about to reach out during the school year, but just time-wise didn't get to. Talk to these people. You'd be surprised when you do mention and be honest about how you're taking a gap semester to figure things out, like people are almost more willing to help you out because you're really carving out this time to make sure you're getting all the right information and doing the right things. And also, don't be afraid to like continue talking to professors or just people from universities. Just because you're not enrolled doesn't mean your professor's not going to respond to your email. And if, let's say, you're back home or like somewhere else, like also take time to use your network at home, or like think about, okay, do I actually enjoy being home more than, let's say, in the US? And that can be a strong indicator on how you might want to plan out your future. So basically a lot of reflecting, but also a good amount of resting.
Sounds good. And so I think that's a great answer, even for someone who's not taking a gap sem. This is definitely what summertime is for. It's like one, the break, and two, the reflection. Generally, and I wish this were different, but this is true not only of me, but most guests I've had on the podcast. University can get intense and busy, and so at university, it's difficult to carve out time to like reflect, take a step back. What am I doing here? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? How can I do better? Summer is the time when you're also away from the entire ecosystem. So many of us are back at home in a more like relaxed and safe space in the childhood home. In my case, I think my summer was a lot of like free writing. Questions like what went well about the first year, what could have gone better, intentions for second year, what do I want from my next 3 years, plus a lot of those long walks in nature or whatever works best for you in terms of just getting your mind right. Because again, this is something I love asking on the podcast. We don't have time to talk about it in that today. But what I will say is each year of university looks very different in terms of people's priorities, your mindset, your challenges. So each year of university cannot be identical to the last one. And so it's very valuable, like before you're entering each year, each semester, setting up yourself, like what are like the top things I want to achieve that semester. I'm super glad. I think you planted the seed of an idea in my mind. Maybe if it comes to it, I'll let you know if I'm taking a gap sem for whatever reason. Maybe we can plan that out together. But I'm hoping this plants just the seed of an idea, even in a listener's mind, someone who might not even have known that this exists. Like I have to finish the 4 years. People have taken entire years off and then got back and graduated. So that is also a possibility.
Sure.
Have that in the back of your mind. A lot of people, especially the startup people, think that like if I take a sem or a year off, they might not let me back in. There are literally people who go and work on startups for years, come back to school, finish the degree, and then jump right back into the startup. Like that is very, very doable. So I just want to be clear.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to echo that. As long as you tell the school early enough, like that you're taking gap semester, like it's really easy to get back in like paperwork wise. And 3 years out of undergrad, no one has ever asked me why I took a gap semester or like questioned. Yeah, no one has ever questioned to me, both in job applications and grad school.
Awesome. I think it's been a slightly different episode to the ones I've hosted in the past. We touched on some very, very interesting topics. Gap Sem is the first time that like, this term is being introduced on the podcast. We talked about personal growth at university, which I love. We went deep into like Wesleyan, the application, electives. So honestly, from when we started, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We began with high school, we went into undergrad. Now now we're already at present day Candice, who's just graduated from Stanford with a master's and is now trying to get into the field of genetic counseling. If I had to fast forward even more in time, 2 to 3 years from today, what do you see yourself doing professionally?
Yeah, I still see myself working with patients in genetic counseling. But I think in 3 to 5 years, I could be starting transitioning to a adjacent role, maybe one in public health or health policy. That I get really excited when talking about regulation, especially a regulation of genetic testing and therapeutics, and also advocating for appropriate care and coverage of genetic services. So I think that's definitely an area that I will move into. But first, I really need on the ground experience to make sure I can like advocate correctly once I get into that role.
just in case someone listening is actually like now seriously considering this niche of genetic counseling,
Mhm.
or sort of a genetic counselor working with patients currently, are there any other potential interesting career paths? Someone who studied genetic counseling but doesn't directly want to be working with the patients, anything else they can do professionally? Just so we're throwing out some ideas.
Yeah. So you could be doing a lot of things. A lot of people actually work in genetic testing labs, so they don't see patients at all. They just um, write up the reports that genetic counselors who see patients use. Or you could work for pharmaceutical companies to like either create or do clinical trials of gene therapy work, and that's also a big area where genetic counselors work. And another subsection of people do public health. Um, some of you guys might be familiar with like newborn screening programs where uh, a child is often tested for a lot of genetic conditions right when they're born. So, like working with the government to decide what actually goes on that list of conditions or like the logistics of that. So, those are just some examples.
Last minute question that came to mind. This is personal curiosity as well. Does your work involve like CRISPR or any sort of gene editing, any of this fancy new technology?
So, I will say generally genetic counselors don't work with CRISPR. We don't actually like make the treatments or like do the actual lab testing. We're more, I would say, like translators of either the result or explaining what will be done as a treatment to patients or to the client. Um, but again, this is a pretty new field, and I feel like potentially if CRISPR is more mature or more like clinically used, like it definitely I feel like could be under our scope of practice to like actually use CRISPR.
Okay, very cool. Um, Awesome. Well, we'll begin wrapping up this conversation. We will cannot let you go without our iconic sort of fast fire round of questions. Just a few quick questions I'll be asking you, throwing them at you like bullets. Feel free to also be answering very briefly. One short phrase or one short sentence will do. Um, we will begin with the most fascinating biology concept you've discovered over the last few years of just studying and going in depth in the field.
It still blows my mind that the microbes in your gut can alter your DNA expression and alter so many things about you. So definitely research about that.
Um, for a non-bio person like me, say like one or two sentences about what are the implications of that.
Yeah. I think in terms of like genetics, people always think like once we're born with it, it doesn't change, or if things change it, it's like because of environment. But your diet, like where you spend your time in, can alter your microbes, which in turn can change what genes are turned on or how much of it is turned on, um, which I think is just not explored enough. We don't actually know exactly how it determines our health, but there's something there for sure.
Number two, what's your favorite campus tradition at Wesleyan?
I really enjoy the silent rave nights where everyone wears headphones and everyone listens to the same playlist, and then we move around campus throughout the evening.
Number three, I'm sure we have bio nerds listening to the podcast. Any recommendations? This could be either a book or a podcast or even an online course.
One of my favorite books with bio would be The Health Gap, The Challenge of an Unequal World by Michael Marmot. And it's a great intro book to health policy and like thinking about how social factors influence health.
Very cool. Number four is any wise quote that has actually stuck with you or motivated you over the years.
So I actually don't know where this quote exactly comes from, but it's something like this. Sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage for something great to happen. And I love it just because it's really simple, but if you apply it, like just be brave, challenge yourself for just a minute, like you never know what's going to come out of it.
I love that. That's a really good quote. Do you want to repeat it once again for listeners, just so it like sticks?
Yeah. sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage for something great to happen.
Okay. And lastly, any one fascinating thing you've discovered about American people or about American culture since you've been here for essentially the last 7, 8 years?
Um, Americans love to drive and love their cars, and it seems like nowhere is too far to drive to. But I think I like that spirit, which translates to like their willingness to just go somewhere and explore. It doesn't matter how long it takes. I really appreciate that about American people.
The typical West Coast to East Coast American road trip. Um,
Yeah.
have that in college. Please do. You will never forget it. Still on my bucket list. Okay. Lastly, if you had to wrap up what's been a great episode, very emotional, also very informative. I learned a lot of new sort of mindset or perspective approaches to making the most of undergrad. Um, for our listeners, I'm assuming they are middle or high schoolers, so younger than someone like me, about to jump into college and then jump into sort of the big blue world. Any final words for this particular episode, Candice?
I would say it really is the connections that you build with people that direct you and also propel you forwards in life. And that doesn't mean to just like connect with as many people as you can, but also means to really devote time to foster those connections you meet that are meaningful to you. So when you go off into the world, go off to college, don't forget friends and family back home, like devote time to that. And if you meet someone that you really click with, like carve out time to develop that relationship.
That's well said. Disclaimer time. The whole podcast is a gimmick. This is all a networking initiative. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
A good secondary. The beauty of starting like any interesting project at university, that could be a book you're writing or a podcast or a startup you're building. The beauty of taking initiative at university is you'll also attract similar people who also are like proactive and agentic. And so when they see you taking initiative and building something or diving deep into something, and when you spread that out into the world and when you talk about that to people, it's easy to also attract people with a similar energy. So that's what I will end with, is sort of go into university and build interesting projects that you are passionate about, and you will attract like-minded people as much as you can. So brilliant. Well, unfortunately, I feel like I could pick your brain about maybe 10, 15 other different topics. We will wrap up this episode now, and maybe there's a part two for sure. Candice, if a listener is interested in connecting with you or reaching out with follow-up questions, what's a good way to actually reach you?
Yeah, feel free to email me. My email is Candice604, Candice 604 at live.cn. Alternatively, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, which is Candice, last name Shi.
Perfect. And I'll link those in the episode description as well, hoping people reach out. That was the episode. Thank you for your time, Candice. It was lovely hosting you on Uni Unveiled, and I'm hoping that there was value in this to listeners. There's value for me, and so I have no doubt that even listeners have a lot of takeaways from this. But thank you for like being on Uni Unveiled. It was a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure for me to share my experience with all of you guys as well.
All right, that was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on Uni Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Uni Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to Uni Unveiled.